Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, we have guests from faraway places, and today we have a guest all the way from South Portland, Maine. How about that? Came down in this very inclement weather we're having in Boston today. And she's a unique individual for the friendship that she developed with Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She's a graduate of Dartmouth College, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I just wanted to read a few things about her. She's an author. She's written, I think, almost 9 books, a television host, and of course we're going to try to recruit her for this show, a speaker, and an artist. And she'll be sharing with us today and next week her experiences of helping Mother Teresa care for destitute children in orphanages, both and in the home of the dying, both in Calcutta and then in the South Bronx?
Exactly.
And which is here in America, for those Bostonians that don't know that the Bronx is in New York. And anyways, Mother Teresa allowed Susan to chronicle her experiences in her book, Mother Teresa's Lessons of Love and Secrets of Sanctity, which we have a copy of here on this desk and also will be on the screen. And well, welcome, Susan Conroy.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be with you.
Susan, first of all, how did you ever get involved with Mother Teresa? How did that all come about?
Actually, I first met Mother Teresa when I was 21 years old. So it all happened during my college years, when this friendship, this relationship first developed. And I actually love to share with people that it started with my mom.
Really? How so?
In the sense that I'm from South Portland, Maine, as you mentioned, and I went away to college in Hanover, New Hampshire. And every week my mom would write me what I call love letters from home. She'd send her love, let me know what's going on in Maine, what's going on with my brothers and sisters. And one week she included something very special in her letter from home, letter from Maine. She had torn out a page from a magazine with a painting of Mother Teresa, with Mother Teresa's hands folded in prayer, and gorgeous words on joy by Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And these words were so beautiful and so inspiring to me that I taped this piece of paper up on my wall at college. And even though I was studying economics and things that had nothing to do with joy, I found great inspiration just from reading these gorgeous words. These were the very first words I ever read in my entire life by Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and they were sent to me by my mom. As inspiring as they were...
What were those words?
The words were, Mother Teresa said that joy is prayer, joy is strength, joy is love. Joy is a net of love by which we catch souls. And she said, we give most when we give with joy. She said the best way to show our gratitude to God and to each other is to accept everything with joy, because a joyful heart is the inevitable result of a heart burning with love. Then she went on to say, on the same piece of paper, Mother Teresa went on to say these words that I just cherished, and they really resonated in my heart. They really touched me deeply. These were my favorite. I have to preface these words just for a minute, if I may, by saying that you're speaking with a woman who has longed for heaven ever since my childhood. I can't wait for heaven. I really get excited to think about seeing God face to face and being with all my favorite saints and being with mom and dad again, and just being with our loved ones. And everything I've ever heard about heaven sounds great to me. There's no more suffering, no more tears, no more trials. And I don't know if it's my Irish background or what, but I always learned from my childhood that life on earth is a journey through the valley of tears. And the Irish are very real, very realistic. Life is hard. Life is difficult. And this is a valley of tears, and we're working our way through it, and there's hardship, there's suffering, there's loss, there's disappointment. Some people call it the valley of disappointment, and those are all very realistic expressions of what our life on earth is about. But heaven, that's when it gets beautiful. That's everlasting happiness, everlasting peace, unending love. I mean, everything about heaven is awesome. It's so awesome that I look forward to it. I've always looked forward to it. And so keep that in mind. You're speaking with a woman who has always looked forward to heaven. And then all of a sudden I'm in college. I'm about 19 or 20 years old. And my mom sends me these very first words by Mother Teresa of Calcutta on joy. And the last half of it is this. Mother Teresa said, we all long for heaven where God is. We all want to be happy with God at this very moment. And then she said, we can be. She said, we can be happy with God here and now. How? by loving as he loves, serving as he serves, helping as he helps, rescuing as he rescues, being with him for all the 24 hours of the day, and even touching him in his distressing disguise of the poor. Wow. For the first time in my life, as about a 19 or 20-year-old, I'm being told that I can be with God right now on earth. I don't have to wait for heaven. I can be happy with God even on earth. How? By loving and serving and giving and rescuing and helping others, loving one another. Because as St. John the Apostle said, God is love. Let him shine through you. Let him flow through you, and you'll be with him. God will be shining through you on those around you if you start loving and caring and giving. And so anyway, that really resonated with me. These words on joy and these words about how you can be with God even on earth by loving and serving. And so I just was so inspired, but it never crossed my mind that I might become friends with Mother Teresa. It never crossed my mind that I might meet Mother Teresa until I came home from college on Christmas break, back home to Maine, and on the coffee table in the living room was a set of 3 little books by Mother Teresa of Calcutta that Mom had ordered. And I picked up the books.
Did she know you had an interest in Mother Teresa at that time?
She's the one who introduced me to Mother Teresa, and I don't think I had a chance to even tell my mom how much those words on joy meant to me because I was away at college studying, and so I didn't have a chance. And in the meantime, Mom bought the 3 little books by Mother Teresa that changed my life. That changed my life because that's where the dream began. Reading those books by Mother Teresa is where I started dreaming, I want to help Mother Teresa. I want to serve the poorest of the poor in Calcutta, India. I want to go and see a saint and help her.
And what did your mother say when you broke the news to her that you wanted to go to Calcutta?
She was the first person I mentioned the dream to. I said, Mom, what would you think if I got a job, earned the money, and sent myself to India specifically to help serve in the home for the dying? And I'll never in my life forget what my mom said. She said, that would be my worst nightmare. And I felt like saying, but Mom, you did it. You inspired this dream in my heart, Mom. You introduced me to Mother Teresa. You introduced me to her writings. It was precisely in the books that my mom had ordered that I learned that Mother Teresa welcomed anyone with hands to serve and a heart to love to join her in her work for the poor, the sick, and the suffering. And it was in those books I learned about the poverty and suffering and misery, sheer misery in Calcutta, India. But Mom very much inspired this dream in my heart without Mom knowing she was inspiring this.
Well, how did you get over to Calcutta then? Did you graduate from Dartmouth? Or?
No, this is actually a miraculous part of the story as well, and I don't often share this, although it's in the book. I don't often share this when I'm speaking, but I'm from a family of 10 children in Maine. I'm number 7 in a family of 10. Mom was a stay-home mom. We lived in a little house with 1 bathroom with 12 of us. I mean,
wow.
A 3-bedroom house with 12 of us. And so I was not, capable of sending myself to India at that particular time as a 19 or 20-year-old. But after reading those holy books, I call them, that Mom ordered on Mother Teresa and dreaming of going to India, I went back to Dartmouth, back to college with the dream of helping Mother Teresa. And I saw a foundation at college that sponsors students to help others, to serve others. And I went to the dean of this foundation. I said, would you sponsor me to go to India to help Mother Teresa in the Home for the Dying? And she was shocked. She said, we don't have any kind of program like that. She said, but if you can create your own program and establish contacts in India, you can at least apply for funding. Within a matter of 9 weeks, I was on a flight to India with the whole thing paid for by this foundation at college. And they called me a pioneer in India. That I blazed a trail from Hanover, New Hampshire to Mother Teresa's doorstep in Calcutta, India, as a pioneer serving the poorest of the poor with Mother Teresa.
Well, now, they don't speak English, I don't think, in Calcutta. What happened when you get to Calcutta? They speak, Bengali and some other language, don't they?
Right, Hindi and Bengali, and you're exactly right. And actually, this foundation that ended up paying for the flight to have me journey over and serve the poor with Mother Teresa, they grilled me with questions before they funded this. And it sounded like they were trying to discourage me from going. And one of the questions they asked me was, how do you expect to communicate over there? You don't speak the native language. And I said to them, I'll be serving little orphans, little babies and children in a children's home, in a children's orphanage, unwanted, abandoned, malnourished children. I'll be in the Home for the Dying, serving the dying men and women whom we lifted up out of the gutters, feeding them their last meal, holding them in their final agony, just serving everywhere. And I said to this committee, I said, the work that I will be doing will communicate everything I wish to say. Those little babies, when I hug them, will know that I love them. And that dying man, when I hold his hand till the end of his life, will know I love him. And so actions speak louder than words. And I will be able to say everything I want to say to the poor, the sick, the suffering, the lepers, and the dying by what I'm doing, by serving. And I call it the universal language of love. Love is understood everywhere in the world you go.
Well, you shared a story the other day that you didn't speak English and you're in the middle of this. How big is Calcutta compared to Portland, Maine?
There's no comparison. Calcutta is a city of tens of millions, and it's hard to count in a city that size. Some say 27 million, 30 million, 33 million. It's enormous. It's, let's just say, give a conservative figure of 27 million. And Portland, Maine is the largest city we have in the whole state of Maine, and I'm not sure it's even 80,000.
Wow, that's something.
I'm not sure if it's even 80,000, and you compare that to 27 million. And so it was a dramatic culture shock to show up alone on the streets of Calcutta.
And how did you get into the middle of the city? Did you get dropped off from the airport at a cab in the middle of the city, or did they know where to take you? Or
That's a great question. Professor at Dartmouth, when he found out there was a student that was going to India, he loved India, and so he sort of coached me on what to drink and what not to drink, and what to wear, what not to wear. And he actually told me things like, you'll have to change your t-shirt 3 times a day because you will be drenched with sweat. It is so hot, 110 degree temperatures, 100% humidity. He said, you'll be sweating like never before in your life. But he said, please God, you don't arrive in the middle of the night alone in the airport. And that's exactly what happened. I arrived in the middle of the night alone in the airport, and I was warned by him, don't you dare get into a taxi in the middle of the night or we'll never see you again. And as it turned out, an Indian gentleman said, why don't you come in my taxi? I'll bring you to a YWCA and see if I can find a room for you. And I ended up trying to trust him, and God protected me all the way. But the very next morning, I set out on the streets of Calcutta to look for Mother Teresa. I needed to find Mother Teresa in order to find her shelters for the lepers, for the orphans, for the dying, for the sick. So I set out among 27 million people looking for one human being, and I didn't speak the language. And after about 20 minutes of walking, I got completely lost. I didn't know which way to go, and I must have looked completely clueless on the streets of Calcutta. And people, the Indian men, particularly the Indian men on the streets of Calcutta, saw a confused American girl and started calling out to me, Mother Teresa, and pointing the way to Mother Teresa's house, as if they knew that no American girl in her right mind would be walking the streets of Calcutta unless she was looking for Mother Teresa to help serve the poor.
Well, that's quite something. Now, we have a few pictures. Maybe we could put the first one up on the screen, and you could talk a little bit about it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we'll bring you first to the presence of Mother Teresa, and I always like to share with people, look how little she is. Look how little Mother Teresa is. She's only about 4'11", only about up to my shoulder, and I also like to point out, when you see me with Mother Teresa, this is when I was 21 years old, you're seeing me standing there with Mother Teresa and one of the other volunteers. Look at the joy in our faces. Look at the smiles on our faces. When we were in the presence of a living saint, when we were in the presence of such a great soul, the joy was so palpable. That was one of the most prevalent things I experienced in the presence of Mother Teresa. Was we were overwhelmed with joy. We couldn't stop smiling. And after being with her, we could step out into the worst slums of India and face the worst human misery, but we couldn't hold back the joy. And we were spilling our love onto everybody we met, as if Mother Teresa filled us with happiness and love and peace, and then we go share that with one another.
Well, didn't she have a philosophy of joy?
Very much. And remember, those are the very first words I ever read by Mother Teresa that Mom sent me, joy. Joy is strength. And she also, you can't become a member of the Missionaries of Charity without having a spirit of cheerfulness in it. And she wanted us to come with a joyful willingness to do even the most humble work for the poor, the sick, and the dying. And joy was a very important part of her whole ministry. And the way she explained it was that the people we are loving and serving are mentally ill, they're physically ill, they're lepers, they're abandoned, they're lonely, they're unwanted babies, and people in their final agony. These are the poorest of the poor. And she said, if we go to them with a sad face, we will only make them more depressed. So come with joy, come with a smile, come with a sense of humor, come with cheerfulness. That was very important. That was just like love, that was at the heart of her ministry, the joy, the smile.
Mm-hmm. And how about the next picture? What do we have here?
Mother Teresa and Pope John Paul II, who's now Saint John Paul II, and Mother Teresa will soon be declared a saint herself. So 2 future saints here. This was Pope John Paul II's very first and only trip to Calcutta, India, the same year that I made my first trip to Calcutta, India. So he visited in the home for the dying and blessed all of the sick and the dying and the poor in this beautiful refuge where we cared for people till the end of their life.
Did the Pope show up because he heard you were coming?
I don't think so.
No? How about the next photo? What do you have there?
I had visited some lepers in a place outside the city of Calcutta. And on a train ride back into the city, I leaned my head out the train window and took this photograph because I thought when I came back home to Maine, in particular, back home to the United States, people wouldn't believe me if I tried to explain to you the millions of people on the streets of Calcutta. And so I took a picture to show you the ocean of humanity. And can you imagine Susan Conroy walking through those millions of people looking for one human being, Mother Teresa, Mother Teresa, and how blessed I felt to find her.
In the next photo?
Just some glimpses. The next few pictures are really some glimpses of the streets of Calcutta, where people were constantly washing themselves at the side of the road and brushing their teeth with their fingers or sticks or old brushes, cooking their meals. This is where they lived and this is where they died, right out in the open on the streets of Calcutta. Calcutta is a city where literally thousands of people sleep on the streets at night. Thousands on the streets at night. This is a typical meat shop in Calcutta where you'd see the meat hanging in the sun, covered in flies, baking in the sun, covered with flies, and huge crows would come and perch on top of the meat and rip off chunks of meat when the gentleman wasn't sitting on his countertop. And as I've shared before, I think
Did he
people...
have a fly swatter?
I think people can understand why temporarily I became a vegetarian while I was in Calcutta, because the meat was so contaminated I would have gotten violently ill if I tried to eat that meat there hanging in the sun. And it was monsoon season, so as I said, temperatures were hovering up around 110 degrees, the humidity was 100%, but it was also torrential downpours that would suddenly flood the streets of Calcutta. So one minute I'd be walking along the dry, dusty streets, the next minute I'd be walking knee-deep through some of the flooded back streets of Calcutta, making my way to the orphanage, making my way to Mother Teresa's house to serve the poorest of the poor.
And next?
And you'd just see little children on the streets and you'd wonder, do you have a mummy? Do you have a daddy? Why is this little girl in the streets of this huge city streets? And Mother Teresa and the sisters were always rescuing the little ones from the streets. And so just the next slide actually brings us just outside the orphanage where I volunteered every day. Mother Teresa also had a food distribution center where she and the sisters, the missionaries of charity, would cook huge containers full of food of rice and soup and food. And the poor would line up by the hundreds every day waiting for their daily bread and their dish of rice from Mother Teresa and the missionaries of charity. In the next picture is the actual orphanage where I volunteered every morning just down the street from Mother Teresa's house. And when I stepped into the orphanage, this is what I saw, a room full of little, gorgeous little Indian children sitting lifelessly on a cement floor. No one talking, no one laughing, no one playing, as if their problems weighed too heavily on their minds. It really touched me how these children were hungry for love and starving for the human touch. They had enough food to eat. I could see it every day. These children have enough food to eat, but they're hungry for love. And,
So what would you do when a baby cried out, for instance?
well, I remember my very first, you can actually go to the next slide for a close-up of lunchtime in the orphanage. The next picture is a close-up of these gorgeous children. My very first day in the orphanage, a little baby girl sitting on the floor started crying. I was brand new. It was my very first day as a volunteer. And when you see a baby crying, I went up and picked her up. And I was really touched because instantly when I touched her, she stopped crying. And I started walking around the orphanage holding this gorgeous little baby and thinking that was easy, you know, all she needed was a hug, you know. And but I like to share that story because I'll never in my life forget the experience of trying to put this baby girl back down on the floor. Because a little boy started crying. Another little child started crying. And so I went to put this little baby girl back down on the floor so I could pick up the little boy who's crying. And I'll never forget how the little girl was clinging to me, clinging around my neck. She wouldn't let go, as if she was afraid that when I put her back down on the floor, it might be a while before anyone came and held her again. And I learned that important lesson within 5 minutes of volunteering in Mother Teresa's orphanage, that my most important job, more important than feeding the children, changing their diapers, or giving them medicines, was love them, hug them. You know, they were crying out, silently crying out for love.
Wow, that's really something. Were there any other pictures that involved?
Yeah, then it was potty time.
Potty time.
Potty time. After lunchtime came potty time, whether you had to go or not. And the next slide is actually a close-up of potty time where you see these gorgeous, gorgeous little children. And sometimes the little children would fall asleep and sink into their potties. And so our job was to rescue them. You see the little boy in the back corner, he fell asleep and he fell into his potty. And so again, we would go wake him up and pull him out. And I have to say, potty time was the funniest time of the entire day. Every morning, that was the funniest time, to see the little children chitter-chattering with each other in the potties or whatever was happening. They were so cute. They were so funny. And it was a beautiful balance to work with the children every morning and with the dying every afternoon. And then we'd put them to sleep, the little ones on blankets on the floor and the infants in the cribs. And then we'd tiptoe out of the orphanage onto the streets of Calcutta before resuming work in the afternoon at the home for the dying.
Wow, so that's really quite something. And is it in this book that you mentioned that, or is it?
All of this and then some. This book took me 7 years to write, so
Is that right?
I put my heart into this book, and there are over 100 photographs in the book, and it's called Mother Teresa's Lessons of Love and Secrets of Sanctity, so it's Mother Teresa's Lessons of Love and Holiness for us all. Even if when you live in Boston, you read and learn her Lessons of Love and Holiness, that you can live it here and now, right here in Boston, right here in the United States. So.
What kind of impression or things that Mother Teresa, you mentioned joy and other things that you learned from her that you wouldn't have seen, say, you wouldn't have necessarily run across them here in America, or it's an attitude. Is it an attitude, or is it? Tell us what.
Well, one of the most shocking things to me about Mother Teresa shocked me. When I first met Mother Teresa, I was 21 years old. I had showed up at her doorstep to offer my hands to serve and my heart to love. And in that very first day of being with Mother Teresa and conversing with Mother Teresa, interacting with her and watching her, I was shocked by her profound humility. I couldn't believe how humble she was. She was one of the most humble human beings I've ever seen in my life. She was as humble as the men we lifted out of the gutters, who had hit rock bottom in life. They were the poorest of the poor, literally eaten by maggots and living with rats. And we would lift them up and bathe them and comfort them and feed them and care for them. And they were humble. They were humble. She was that kind of humility, deep humility. I felt like tapping her on the shoulder and saying, don't you realize how important you are? Don't you realize how famous you are? I knew before meeting her that she was a celebrity. She was world famous. She had already won the Nobel Peace Prize and all of that. She was literally world famous. And yet she was so humble. And I just never thought a famous person would be so humble. Usually the most famous human beings aren't the most humble human beings. And so I was very surprised by that. And it was gorgeous. And you know what struck me as a young 21-year-old witnessing her firsthand and being with her and interacting with her over the course of 11 years, is it really struck me that first summer in India, humility is a sign of true greatness. It just was clear as day in my heart. Humility is a sign of true greatness. She's so humble, and that's one of the things that makes you most Christ-like. Jesus Christ himself, the Son of God, said to us, learn from me, from gentle and humble of heart. Even though he's the great one, he's the Holy One, he said, I'm gentle and I'm humble. And those who call themselves Christian should have the spirit of Christ, which is a gentle spirit and a humble heart. And so it's gorgeous to see humility, a real genuine humility. And that's what was one of the most inspiring things about Mother Teresa, not just her compassion, her love, her joy. She had a great sense of humor, but she was so beautifully humble, so beautifully humble.
Well, what kind of sense of humor did she have? Was it a dry wit? Or?
Oh, she was very funny. I remember I was with her, you mentioned at the beginning that I wasn't just with her in Calcutta, India, I was also with her in the Bronx and in Harlem, South Bronx and Harlem, serving our country's poorest of the poor. And I remember once I was with her and the sisters in the South Bronx at her house, at her headquarters in New York, and I was telling one of the sisters, one of the missionaries of charity, how beautiful Calcutta was, because I had such beautiful experience there, such beautiful work is being done there. So I saw Mother Teresa walk through the room, and so I called over to Mother Teresa, I said, Mother, isn't Calcutta a beautiful place? And Mother Teresa, without skipping a beat, she said, yes, and I hope to see you there again someday, wearing one of these. I think that was a joke. I think it was a joke.
Well, she was out there recruiting, I guess.
She was funny. There was another quick story in the South Bronx. I believe it was Cardinal O'Connor in the South Bronx, who was very close friends with Mother Teresa and the missionaries.
Very pro-life.
Very pro-life. He started the Sisters of Life.
Oh, did he?
I believe it was his baby. It was his idea to start the Sisters of Life. But he was close friends with Mother Teresa also, very pro-life, like you said. Well, he was visiting with Mother Teresa in the South Bronx at her convent. And the convent, when you visit her convent in the South Bronx, there are iron gates, you know. And so Mother Teresa was standing behind the iron gates, you know, waving farewell as Cardinal O'Connor was going to be driven away, and waving to him. And he said, he rolled down his window and he said to Mother Teresa, it's about time you ended up behind bars. But Mother Teresa went into gales of laughter. She just could laugh, and she could tell jokes, and very witty and very funny. And, you know, it's very important. If your ministry is among the darkest places on earth, the unhappiest, the black hole of Calcutta, you know, the most miserable, the most suffering, the most rejected, the most unwanted people of humanity, you need joy. You need joy, and that's where you bring Christ's light. That's where you bring the sunshine of God's love to others. It's starting with a smile. Mother Teresa used to say, love begins with a smile.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for coming on the show today, and we're going to have a second show, part 2, if you will. And what is it going to be on?
Well, we've today shared about a little bit of my work with Mother Teresa in the children's home, in the children's orphanage, and we've walked through the streets of Calcutta today. And in our next show, we'll go into the home for the dying and share some of Mother Teresa's lessons for the sick, the poor, and the dying.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, folks, we hope you find today's show to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.